Ready, set, art. For advanced art, we're going to start a different way of doing a landscape, and we're going to make it mixed media. Media comes from the word medium. Medium means what it's made of. And in this case, it's ink and watercolor. Ink and watercolor. So I'm going to show you some pen and ink techniques. I'm going to show you some watercolor techniques. I'm also going to go over the requirements of the assignment. And I have two examples here. I have my Alps here, right, with these trees, and it's done in a circular formation. So part of it is we're going to do a landscape with pen and ink. The landscape part has to be ink, and the sky needs to be watercolor. It also needs to be placed within a geometric shape. It can go outside of the shape, like this one does. Let me show you my other one. Here's my other one. So in this case, I kept it all inside of this shape. All right. Someone accidentally stepped on this. All right. So anyways, you can see again, it's the same idea. So the landscape itself is pen and ink, and the sky part is watercolor. I need to see some shading and texture, and there should be a light source. So in this case, it looks like the light is coming from the right side, and that's how we see the shading in the mountains. I want you to take a note at the mountains. Let's look at them. Are they triangles? No. They're triangular, but they're not perfect triangles. So I'm going to talk about also how to sketch it out. So when you look at this, it's not geometric, it's organic. Organic means natural. I want you to think about the type of landscapes that you're going to do for this project. So for instance, this one here is desert. This one is forest from the Alps. Could be the Colorado Rockies, could be parts of California with the redwoods. It could be not those two. It could be, say, the rainforest or a swampy area, right? So you can change the landscape up. These were just the two examples that I had made. Okay, I'm going to put these aside for just a moment because I want to talk about the rough draft part of this. Now, for your rough draft, you can just use plain white paper, but for doing the watercolor part, you need to use thicker paper. For this assignment, I did say at the beginning of the school year for your art supply list that you needed thicker paper. I recommended cardstock paper. Why? Because it's inexpensive and you can get a lot of it. So you should have it. I might have said, though, if you happen to have a pack of watercolor paper or just thick paper, meaning thicker than the computer paper, that works fine too. Essentially, it has to be thicker to work with the watercolor, especially for this other technique known as lift out, and I'll show that one later too. Okay. For demonstration purposes, I am going to use cardstock paper because I need to be able to use the watercolor and my pens. And you can see the pens are also from that list. You needed a Sharpie and a thin Sharpie. Okay? All right. If you have thin black pens that are a different brand, that's fine. But if it's like the thick Crayola pens, you're going to have a hard time with this project. Okay, so let me talk about faux pas. So a lot of times when I see people doing a landscape and they want to do the mountains with the trees, and that's probably because part of it is they just saw mine and they want to do something similar. I don't want to see this, okay? Because in real life we would never see three perfect triangular mountains. That just does not happen, right? It may look more like this. I mean, if it's going to look kind of triangular, it's probably something like this where it has ridges, right? It might look more like that. And usually they're all the same height either. They might be like there's one smaller here, and then it kind of dips down, and then all of a sudden there's a bigger one. Maybe it doesn't look like that, but, and I'm drawing darker than normal, mainly for demonstration purposes, but you normally would not do this, right? You would normally have it a lot lighter because you're going to have to ink it. So you might have something like that where it looks more rigid. Let's talk about trees. A common thing I also see is this tree. Arg. Arg. That's okay for elementary. Not for 8th grade though. In reality, we would never see a tree like that, right? They're not like empty in the middle here and then they only flare out on the sides. The closest tree that I know that looks like that might look more like this. Okay, and they kind of, there's some in the front, some to the side, right? See how some in the middle are starting to be more short, and then there's some that flare out. That would be a closer tree to that traditional tree, this type of geometric tree that I see sometimes for students. That's probably the closest I've seen to that type of tree. The one I did here was a really cool pen and ink technique, and I'll show it when we start using pen, okay? But it doesn't have to be trees from from California. Sometimes those really cool trees in Japan, you might do a bonsai, right? Those bonsai trees. Those are great too, where they kind of zigzag like this, and then they have these really interesting branches off to the sides. And then a lot of tiny little leaves, of course. And I could keep going, but you could look up a bonsai tree. So it doesn't have to be the traditional trees that I'm thinking about. Here's another one that kind of, rough draft wise, I see it, I'm like, oh no, okay? And that's the palm tree. Very geometric. And then of course the wave lines, right? Oh, please, this is not, I'm asking that it needs to be organic, not geometric. There's plenty of times that we do geometric. We just did it with cubism. That was fine. I'm switching to organic. So in that case, if it's the palm tree, I want you to look up a palm tree, that's for sure. They do kind of have that slant, but they kind of more like have these little ridges. If you were with me in 6th grade, we had a day where we practiced trees, right? Okay. And then they come down kind of like this. And then as they go up, instead of seeing it straight on, they start falling down. See? You don't really see it from the top. And then as it flares up like this, then we start to see it kind of go straight up like that. All right? So it's a similar idea. I could see why kids draw it this way, but I want you to actually look it up. So whatever landscape you're using, don't just make it up. I need you to actually reference a real landscape and sketch it out. Sketch it out. All right, let's talk about when you're all ready to move on. All right, so what I did is, of course, I used some type of base. You know, I had something like this, and I drew a circle, and then I sketched it out. You don't have to have a black outline going around like this one does. I just wanted to show two different styles. One with the black outline, one where it doesn't have it, and then it comes out of it, right? So you could do it both ways. I lightly sketched it, and then I went and watercolored it first. And you might think, well, why would you watercolor it first? It seems natural to do the ink first. Well, no, because what if you do the ink first and you accidentally watercolor over it? Well, then it's too late. Okay, it's done. The watercolor is there, and you won't be able to get it out. So really, you would do the watercolor first, and that way if you accidentally do go over, then you would just ink around it, right? And then you would get a really, really nice line. So let's start with those watercolor techniques, right? Let's start with a plain blue sky. I know one of them I did a sunset. You can do a sunset, right? No problem. So you're going to kind of put down a pile of water, right? Use your blues, kind of do that. You need a lot of it. And you can see you need a lot of water to do this. And right as soon as you think you got it, you go in with your paper towel and you lift. You want more? Lift. Okay? Lift. Okay? So now you have variations. You have some darker areas, lighter areas, medium value areas. If you do make a mistake, you can probably lift some of it out. Not too much though. I'm just going to gently go back and forth. Now If you've worked with watercolor before, you know one thing about it. Okay, so that was able just to lift a tiny bit, not too much. You know that if you're too aggressive with the brush, it will start to make the paper rip and kind of ball up, and then you probably need to start over because it's a ripped kind of messy paper to work with. So really be careful with doing that, okay? You got to be really gentle with that brush. Okay, some inking techniques. All right, you have the bigger one and the smaller one. So obviously the bigger one's good for big shaded areas. And then with the smaller ones, great for the details, okay? I want you to notice something in this one. When I show the other examples, you're going to notice that we use lines to do the shading, right? Because it's a really nice way to create medium value. So like this one, there's fewer lines and they're further apart. That creates the medium value. These are longer lines and they're closer together. That creates a darker value. Same idea. For those squiggle trees, I kind of drew the tree first and I kind of made it funny and irregular looking. And then as I did this part, I kind of did a wiggle, almost like a hairball, a squiggle. A figure eight, if you say, like a figure eight, going like this, squiggling back and forth. That's how I did the tree on the other one. That's how I did this one, okay? Just so you know. Let's look at this other one. All right, so in this case, when I did this one, I did a light blue first in chunks, and then I did a light pink in chunks, and then I went back and I let it dry, so we could do that glazing technique. Glazing is when you put it on top of a dry watercolor. So I waited till it's dry, and then I added my other colors in. Once that was dry, then I inked it. Now when you look at it, it should have at least 30% shading of black. So it's okay to have big white areas because that's a great contrast against the color section. But it can't be pure white. It can't be just a pure outline of it. It does need some shaded areas to even contrast the white areas so that it's easier to see the subject matter within the black and white ink areas. Okay? So I hope that helps. So in your rough drafts, I need to see 3 different rough drafts, 3 geometric shapes, the landscape inside. Okay? You don't have to worry about the watercolor part just yet. It's a rough draft, but I want to see how you're going to attempt the plants. Please, please, please reference real landscapes for it. I don't want to see these weird geometric shapes. That was okay for cubism. You need to step it up for this type of assignment. Okay? Thank you. Good luck.